More talks and more fighting. The Syrian opposition launches a surprise assault on Damascus while their representatives meet in Geneva. What does the battle for the capital mean for peace prospects? Also on the program, China's preferred candidate wins Hong Kong's election. Carrie Lam vows to unite a society divided, but can she convince democracy activists that Beijing knows best? And demands for an end to fighting. Tens of thousands of Yemenis protest in Sanaa on the anniversary of the Saudi-led intervention. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. The Syrian opposition seemed to be on the back foot after losing control of Aleppo and failing to gain diplomatic ground at consecutive rounds of peace talks. But then came the surprise assault on Damascus. Last week, the Free Syrian Army launched a campaign to seize control of key districts, with fighters getting as close as they've ever come to the presidential palace. It's seen as one of the most significant offensives on the capital since the uprising began. Now, the regime responded with waves of airstrikes, pounding rebel positions, all while key players meet for yet another round of peace talks in Geneva. Our newsmaker today is the fight for Damascus, as we ask what it signifies about the strength and resolve of the Syrian opposition.
A week of intense fighting in Syria's capital, as opposition fighters launched the biggest assault against the regime in months. It began last week with surprise attacks that left the regime scrambling to defend front lines. The opposition took territory in eastern Damascus and launched another offensive in Hama a few days later. It's their first major push since losing their last urban stronghold, eastern Aleppo, to the regime and its allies in December. The regime has now pushed them back in the capital, recapturing most of the territory in eastern Damascus. But the battle around Hama continues. The United Nations says the fighting has cut off 300,000 civilians from humanitarian assistance in opposition-held areas. And they say unless aid is allowed in, starvation will be around the corner. As the warring sides fight on the ground, some of their representatives gathered in Geneva to discuss a path to peace. But the realities of the battlefield proved difficult to put aside.
Those are Syrian civilians. They are being targeted by the Assad killing machine and whoever is helping Bashar al-Assad.
This is why we require to start these talks with anti-terrorism issues. This is especially a concern given the terror attacks in Damascus and in the suburb of Hama.
UN Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, described the situation on the ground as worrisome and called on Turkey, Iran and Russia to help reinforce the ceasefire. But the opposition says this offensive was an act of self-defense, saying it believes the regime had plans to ethnically cleanse the area.
The regime did not commit itself, and it never stopped for one full day without breaching the ceasefire. So they tried to defend themselves against what was being planned by the regime for them.
As the dynamic on the ground continues to change, are we likely to see more of these kinds of offences from Syrian opposition groups? And what impact will that have on attempts to bring the war to an end? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To discuss the Damascus offensive further, I'm joined from Chicago by Azim Ibrahim. He is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Policy and a professor at the Strategic Studies Institute at the U.S. Army War College. And from Laguna Beach, California, Alexander Azadgan. He is a professor of strategic global management and international political economy. Thanks both so much for joining us. Alexander, let me start with you. The fact that all-out conflict has now moved this close to the regime's capital and very stronghold, what does that say to you now about this war?
Well, Andrea, the very purpose and intent of this war is to make sure they prolong it as much as possible, this lunatic concept of perpetual war that we have been seeing first in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and it was sort of enwrapped in this concept of regime change, which in many cases is illegal. Foreign entities going into another country and overthrowing this president. I am not sitting here defending President Assad. I'm defending this horrible situation. I'm actually attacking this horrible situation where this becomes a terrible precedent in international relations, and coupled with a proxy war that, if God forbid, becomes successful, is going to be modeled for future proxy wars that are going to take all over the planet and are going to cause all sorts of problems to peace and security.
Azim, are you on the same page here? Do you see this as a lunatic concept of perpetual war?
I think Alexander is absolutely right. What we have here is a situation in which foreign entities are interfering in this civil war situation. Where I would disagree with him, however, is that the foreign entities are actually participating and supporting the regime rather than the Free Syrian Army element. The Free Syrian Army is essentially made up entirely of Syrian civilians, whereas the regime is now being supported by foreign militia, particularly Shia militia from Iran, from Hezbollah, from even countries as far afield as Afghanistan and Pakistan, who have essentially come as mercenaries. We've known for certain that the regime was literally weeks away from collapse had the foreign entities not intervened and supported and propped up Bashar al-Assad regimes, and that includes the Air Force in its entirety, almost in its entirety, provided by Vladimir Putin. So I agree with Alexander, foreign entities should not have intervened in this conflict and are simply prolonging the war.
Alexander, I'm not sure you would agree on that point, because I'm not sure you see the Free Syrian Army as an army solely of civilians fighting for freedom and democracy.
The saying goes that the Free Syrian Army is neither free or is it Syrian, although it contains elements of the Syrian army that capitulated and are on this side. I object to your other guest comment as far as only assigning blame to certain groups. I think the other groups that see themselves as independent are either pawns of other superpowers, regional powers with their own hegemonic plans. There is no free side here. Everybody is a proxy. Everybody is more or less dependent on another entity. You have a group like ISIS, which we all know is supported, used to be supported, at least up to now, or quite possibly into the future, by the Qataris and the Saudis for energy purposes, which I'd like to get into, Andrea, if you have a few minutes toward the end. This is not a geosectarian war, as much as some people would like to characterize it. It is essentially an energy war and a war over resources such as water, believe it or not. But it was characterized and it was presented under the guise of a Shia-Sunni sectarian line. Now, this doesn't goes to say that we don't have a 1400 Shia-Sunni issue. We do. But that issue is being exploited in order to cover a much bigger issue, which is a discovery of natural gas in the eastern parts of Mediterranean, which we have Israelis completely taking advantage of this situation of chaos and anarchy and exploiting the natural gas. Meanwhile, Syria and other countries are totally preoccupied with this crazy and endless occupation and proxy war, and that takes away all their attention away from claiming their territorial natural gas under the Mediterranean.
Let me just ask Azim quickly. That is not an often heard interpretation of this conflict. Do you agree with Alexander there?
Well, it's not often heard simply because it's not true. This idea that you can conflate ISIS and the Free Syrian Army is a typical propaganda tool to muddy the waters. The Free Syrian Army is essentially made up of Syrian nationals. ISIS is essentially an entity in which all parties are against and all parties want to see the end of. And to conflate the two is just simply muddying the waters. The reality on the ground is this is a fight for freedom. The people of Syria have had enough of Bashar al-Assad, who's ended up being one of the most murderous dictators of this century. The majority of the casualties, over 98% of all the casualties, have been caused by his regime, using chemical weapons, using illegal munitions, targeting schools, And the Free Syrian Army is essentially are elements that want to see the end of this brutal regime and want to adopt a pro-democracy stance.
Okay.
And this confusion of energy is just simply muddying the waters even further.
Okay. Azim, then let me ask you, I mean, ISIS or Daesh is one thing, but what about groups like Jabhat Fatah al-Sham and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that are also included among opposition forces, al-Qaeda-linked groups? What do you make of them? They're not about fighting for freedom and democracy, obviously.
No, and this is the unfortunate situation that we have evolved into. You know, there was a time when the Free Syrian Army had no extremist elements such as those, but they simply were not given the kind of support from the international community that they deserved, which left them with no choice except to make alliances with other groups which have questionable characteristics and unsavory practices. But the reality is that those groups do not make up the majority of the Free Syrian Army. Groups like ISIS and Jabhat Fatah al-Sham do get the maximum media coverage simply because that's exactly what we want to hear in the West. But the reality is, on the ground, is that they do not make up the majority of the actual fighting elements on the ground.
Okay, Alexander, I'll let you respond to that quickly.
Well, you know, Free Syrian Army is free as long as it doesn't make all these horrible alliances, which it did. And this is not muddying the water. This is actual fact, sir. The Free Syrian Army made wrong alliances because of its horrible, opposition to Bashar al-Assad's government. It made alliances with ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra, and others. Coalition of some sort.
There has never been any alliance with ISIS. That's completely incorrect. And
that is not true. No. In the beginning, no, sir. I didn't interrupt you when you were talking. Please let me. I did not interrupt you when you were talking. Let me finish, please. In the beginning, there were many coalitions that were made in order to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And God knows, if Bashar al-Assad responded a little bit more even-handedly in 2011, maybe he wouldn't have gotten to the mess that it is now. But the coalitions that were made, so even the Kurds, who are not actively fighting against against ISIS, they were somehow brought into this umbrella together by the intelligence services. The Israelis even had a hand in this, and so did NATO. So for you to sit there, I don't know what your point of reference is. If your point of reference is only 6 months ago, sir, then you're missing the history since 2011. You got to look at the entirety of this conflict and be able to diagnose and assign blame to people who chose the wrong allies and now are suddenly call themselves free.
Only Bashar al-Assad have chosen the wrong ally, allying with Hezbollah, Iran, Shia militias, and Putin, who are causing unmeasurable harm to the Syrian people, and that is the wrong ally that you should really be pointing the finger to.
Well, and you're telling me Washington is the right ally? You're telling me, look, I'm an American here. I don't use the word America. I use the word Washington. Washington has been supporting ISIS. Now, because they realize ISIS wants to have its own foreign policy objective, suddenly they're out of the game.
Comments like that are a reflection upon yourself when you say Washington has been supporting ISIS. I don't think anybody believes that.
Because that's the truth, sir. No, anybody believes it. Well, if you watch the mainstream media, sir, if you watch CNN and BBC, and if you listen to the garbage that's spewed by those, if anybody is those people, everybody knows the truth, sir. That Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been supporting ISIS, okay? There's nothing you can do to wipe that off. That's history. That's a factual event.
It's falsity. There's absolutely not a iota of evidence behind that.
Gentlemen, I'm going to interrupt it there because we just have a few minutes left. So, Azim, I'll let you have a final word here. Where do you think the resolution to this conflict actually lies? Is it in the halls of the UN in Geneva as we speak?
There has to be a negotiated settlement. This war has turned, no matter what the outcome of this civil war now, is that, all sides have essentially lost. The destruction to Syria, the refugee crisis, the number of people dead, there's simply no coming back from this. This is a disaster of biblical proportions now. And the only solution would be a negotiated settlement to possibly federalize Syria, to balkanize it in some ways, to have the regime possibly stay in power, but Bashar al-Assad going, simply because he's had far too much blood on his on his hands. But unfortunately, all sides still believe that they can achieve victory. Bashar al-Assad has been emboldened with the support of Putin and his air force, and with the Shia militias that are arriving from Iran and elsewhere. And and this is hugely catastrophic. And the rebels have now been emboldened with some of their recent victories around Damascus. They've recaptured 11 villages. They're laying siege to other ones. And so this is a hugely unfortunate situation.
Okay, Azim, I'm going to have to give you the last word there because unfortunately we're out of time. But I'd like to thank you both, Azim and Alexander, for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Hong Kong's election committee has chosen the territory's new leader. Carrie Lam is set to become Hong Kong's first female chief executive. But as China's preferred candidate, some see her win as a loss for democracy. She'll be taking over from the unpopular incumbent who presided over an increasingly divided society. Now, Lam says her top priority will be to unite the city, but that won't be an easy task as she faces a rising tide of anger at what some see as interference from Beijing. And now, rights groups have condemned what appears to be a crackdown on pro-democracy protesters less than 24 hours after votes were counted. Natalie Pohonen reports.
Hong Kong's election for chief executive looked just like any other political campaign. There were three contenders vying for the top job. The former head of the civil service, Carrie Lam, who had the backing of Beijing, former financial secretary John Tsang, nicknamed Mr. Pringles, and retired judge Wu Kuo-king. A poll before voting day showed that more than twice as many people would have wanted to vote for Tsang over Lam. But public opinion doesn't count, because this is how Hong Kong chooses its leader. The territory is home to about 7 million people. Just 6% of the electorate, that's about 230,000 people, are eligible to vote for members of the election committee. There are 1,194 people on that committee, most of whom are loyal to Beijing, and they vote for the chief executive. The candidate with 601 or more votes is declared the winner. Carrie Lam secured 777 votes. Carrie Lam will take over from the deeply unpopular Leung Chun-ying. He's viewed by many locals as being too loyal to China and the one country, two systems policy, which is meant to give Hong Kong semi-autonomy from Beijing. But under Leung's leadership, the calls for more political freedom have grown. Marked by the 2014 student-led umbrella movement, capturing global attention and causing concern in China. The protesters didn't win any concessions for universal suffrage, where every person has a vote. But the movement generated a groundswell of support for the cause, which Hong Kong's people have been grappling with ever since.
Our home is suffering from quite a serious divisiveness and has accumulated a lot of frustrations. My priority will be to heal the divide and to ease the frustrations.
Carrie Lam says there is no difference between how the Hong Kong government and Chinese government view the territory's status. She'll be inaugurated as the new chief executive on July 1st, 20 years to the day since the former British colony was handed back to China. But how will she balance the interests of both Beijing and the Hong Kong people? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Hong Kong is Leung Kwok-hung, also known by his nickname Long Hair. He is a pro-democracy legislator and a longtime social activist. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me ask you first, where does this result of Carrie Lam now being the chief executive of Hong Kong leave your pro-democracy movement?
Well, I think it proves that the quote-unquote election of the chief executive in Hong Kong actually is a fake. Everyone can see it now. Almost all of the Hong Kong adults knows that and knew it for quite a long time. It's just like a ceremony, you know. The Chinese Communist regime in Beijing will handpick the candidates, and then they will crown he or she. Then, so, but this time there are some kind of difference between the Pan-Democrats talking about on the strategy of how to take on this selection. So there are discussion, hot debate, but now it seems that John Zhang, the other candidate who fell in the election, it seems that he will decline from the political scene very soon. So it creates a vacuum since the Pan-Democrat, the mainstream of the Pan-Democrat, try to convince the Hong Kong people that John Zhang deserves the support, even though John Zhang is part of the establishment, and it creates some kind of cult. And now John Zhang are on the way to wave goodbye to those people who support him.
Okay.
That is a headache.
Let me ask you though.
For the Pan-Democrats.
Okay, is your activism and the umbrella movement perhaps losing steam? We saw tens of thousands of people take to the streets in 2014. And yesterday, when this election was taking place, only 300 people came out to the streets. Are you in fear of your movement losing the momentum you'd like it to have?
I mean, it's still to the hard feeling after the failure of the umbrella movement. A lot of those cynicism emerged, you know, and also the people are quite frustrated about what to do next, and so the Pan-Democrat, it seems that they want to shift sides to change their strategy. So that's why they want to take John Zhang as an alternative, which I think this kind of strategy is wrong, because I don't think any opposition who are fighting for democracy under semi-dictatorship should be the check and balance for the establishment. We need to have independent mobilization. We need to have independent organization. We need to have independent analysis. And in the end of the day.
As you say that, though, the pro-Beijing activists in Hong Kong don't share that vision. What do you think it is that they don't see in your fight for wanting popular democracy and universal suffrage?
Because there's a lot of collusion and corruption, you know. Because since there are only about less than 1,200 people who can become a public voter and cast a vote to choose to elect or select the chief executive. So a lot of privilege will be gained through this political deal. And also Beijing have a lot of influence, you know. So actually the contest, the selection of CE is like a private club. Everyone join in, and then they want something in return.
Let me ask you, though, as it stands now, Carrie Lam will be Hong Kong's new leader. She says she wants to heal divisions. That will be her priority. Do you think she can do it?
Well, I think it depends on what is in the mind of the Beijing government, though. Well, just before this interview, 7 of those leaders of the umbrella movement have been charged of several counts of criminal charge. So I don't think Carrie Lam can do the job if Beijing doesn't want to do the job.
Okay, Lung Kwok Hong. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. In today's Picture This, it's been 2 years since the Saudi-led coalition launched its invasion into Yemen against Houthi rebels. Civilians have paid a high price in the conflict, and over the weekend, thousands took to the streets in protest. Here's a look. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.